Back in the 1980s and 90s, it was not unusual to see movies made into video games. Most any film that had any real action tended to have its own game. While many of these were awful, every so often you hit one that was a real winner and well worth the investment. This practice wasn't something you saw a lot of on the Sega Saturn because of its poor performance in the West, but we did see a few in its lifetime. I remember the aerial combat game based on the science fiction film Independence Day. Capcom made a game based on Street Fighter the movie. There was a first-person shooter made after Congo. The first 3 Die Hard films had games made after them in one compilation called Die Hard Trilogy. Batman Forever got a beat-em-up arcade port that had a wild combo system. And who can forget the 3D beat-em-up classic based on The Crow, City of Angels. But today we are going to take a look at a Saturn game called Dragonheart Fire and Steel, a side-scrolling platformer that was based on the film Dragonheart, released in the summer of 1996. It starred Dennis Quaid and Sean Connery and told the tale of the last dragon and the evil tyrant he was connected to. It was a modest box office success, and right on cue, Acclaim swooped in to make a game about it. That game wasn't released on the Saturn until the very end of 1996. It was developed by Funcom, and as a fan of the film, I actually wanted to play it. What followed was a monumental waste of money and easily one of the worst 2D games on the Saturn. Just how bad did it suck? Let's find out. As with most gaming adaptations of films, the story here is loosely based on the source. We still have the noble knight Sir Bowen in the lead role, but his adventure mainly sticks to slaying bad guys and dragons in areas you never saw in the film. The entire setup is a simple side-scrolling hack-and-slash beat-em-up with the occasional boss to deal with. When you start out, you have your basic moves like high and low sword attacks, a back attack, and a punch that can knock down enemies. Along with these basic attacks, you have advanced fighting techniques that do more damage but are much more complicated to pull off with multiple directional presses and your attack button. You can also acquire a bow and various types of arrows to use. Some explode, some burn, and some shoot multiple arrows to hit enemies far away from you. These options are chosen in the inventory screen that shows you how many units of each ammo type you own. Arrows are expensive and you can only buy more in between stages, so you'll need to use them wisely. Unlike most games of this type, there is also an endurance bar that must be considered with every melee maneuver. Weak attacks expend a little while special moves consume a lot. If your endurance bar reaches 0, your ability to attack is severely compromised as you gasp for air and are left open to your enemies. Fortunately, you do have a block that can help you recover. Be aware that enemies will try and catch you in a position where you can still take damage, so don't rest too long. You'll notice after you kill a bad guy that they will drop gold rings. These are used as currency and traded for items like extra lives and arrows at the shop you can visit at the end of a stage. You will also notice a sword and shield icon. You can get items to increase these stats, some temporary and some more permanent. You will also come across goblets to restore your life bar and potions that can restore your endurance. The battlefield also has various things you can interact with. These range from simple things like ledges you can climb, doors you can go into, and catapults that will launch you over walls. There is also a fair bit of platforming to be done at certain times. You need to be really careful in this regard because some mistimed jumps can lead to insta-deaths that rob you of an entire life. And since Dragonheart does not support continues, your lives become quite precious. You do have a password system in place, and you have multiple save slots at your disposal, but each of these options starts you back at the beginning of the level, no matter how far you made it previously. Finally, there are a few inconsequential flying sequences in the game where you are on the back of a dragon directing your movement. This is done via full motion video and has no bearing on anything. If you fail just once, you simply move on to the next area. The visuals of Dragonheart are entirely composed of digitized images. Funcom used real actors for every human character in the game, and the dragons are a mix of digitized representations you saw in the film, as well as quite a few you didn't. The backgrounds and foregrounds are digitized as well, and with the Saturn's ability to display lots of color, they come off far more convincing than past acclaimed titles that attempted similar. But no matter how you slice it, Dragonheart is still ugly as sin. The animation is stiff and janky, the scale is way off on all the dragons, everything is overly dark and lacks any resemblance to the beautiful cinematography seen in the movie. All that is made worse by the repetition in the enemies. You'll mainly be fighting the same 4 or 5 bad guys for the vast majority of this adventure. You'll get the odd bird to swoop down and attack you at random, but outside of those in your boss fights, there isn't much to see here. Even the presentation itself is bare bones. There are no cinematics from the film on display to tell the story, introduce the stages, or any of the dragons you must slay. There is a brief wall of text introducing each stage, and that's it. This seems like something you would have gotten during the 16-bit era, and not something on 32-bit CD-based hardware known for lots of voice work and story scenes. You do get a few cool animation effects here and there, but they ring hollow on a two-dimensional powerhouse like the Saturn. The fact is, this could have and should have been a lot more impressive given the nature of the visuals. Where are the multi-layer backgrounds loaded with special effects? Why are the characters so small? Why is the animation so slow and cumbersome? I don't know. I guess this is a slight step up above the digitized games on the Genesis and Super Nintendo, but on the Saturn, it remains extremely unimpressive. The music in Dragonheart Fire and Steel is your typical ho-hum, vanilla CD audio that has no soul whatsoever. You can't call this stuff unpleasant because it isn't hard on the ears, but you can call it uninspired and lacking the spirit heard in games that do it so much better. You can turn this stuff off entirely and you wouldn't miss it a lick. I won't waste a lot of time on this section, but let's listen to a couple of tracks to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Going into Dragonheart Fire and Steel and seeing acclaim on the box, I knew this had a pretty good chance of not being great. And right on cue, they deliver yet another game to rob you of your precious funds. This plays like absolute garbage. Every move is slow and even the special attacks have to be telegraphed seconds in advance to have any real success with them. You would think your bow and arrows would equalize this, but aiming is slow and completely borked, leaving you wide open to attacks as you switch to what you want and trying to hit anything above you. But the real sin here is the ludicrous endurance system. It only takes a couple of your more powerful moves to drain it and leave you vulnerable. Oh, you can block and wait for your bar to refill, but who the hell thought this was a good idea for a genre that depends on combat being fast and responsive for it to be fun? Instead, you are constantly having to worry about your endurance, especially in the late game when many enemies attack you one after the other. You can increase your life and stamina bars, but enemies become more difficult to kill as you progress, so the weight of running out of endurance never lets up. And good lord, are some of these boss fights ridiculous. Some of the dragons just pop up right on top of you and wreck your life bar as you fumble with the slow animation and worthless attacks. There is a pattern to each one, and once you figure it out, it isn't difficult, but the repeated play sessions with this piss-poor attempt at two-dimensional action is just a headache, plain and simple. You can directly compare this to something like the original Golden Axe, and it plays significantly worse despite being 7 years newer and on radically more powerful hardware. I'll tell you exactly what happened with this one. As development wrapped up, it became clear that Funcom had made the game too easy. In a mad dash for the finish line, the developers added the endurance meter to limit your ability to attack, therefore making things tougher. Oh, they chalked up that addition to a 32-bit innovation and called it a day. But nothing can excuse this poor playing mess. And that leaves me with hardly anything good to say about this waste of space. There are quite a few stages, and it should take you a while to see everything it has to offer. But even that is questionable, since many of you will crumble under its terrible design in the first few areas. Simply put, if you are expecting Donkey Kong Country or Vector Man levels of gameplay, smack yourself silly and get your head out of the clouds. This shit-smelling foulness offers you nothing of the kind and will only leave you disappointed and full of regret. This is a game where I fully agree with the magazines of the era. If you go back to GamePro's original review, they make it clear they were unimpressed, really only praising the digitized visuals. Euromags took some much harder shots at it. The French-based Player One absolutely laid waste to it, giving it a 12%, one of their worst scores ever for the platform. And even the UK's Sega Saturn magazine left little to the imagination, crushing it as only the English can, and dropping yet another disastrous score. I have no doubt some of you got stuck with this as kids and played it enough to find the fun, but this is nothing less than one of the worst Saturn games I've ever played. This was a real shame because the Saturn library did not have a lot of these types of titles. With the 3D polygon craze taking over, nearly every developer abandoned these types of genres for the sparkling newness of 3D fighters, 3D platformers, and 3D adventure games. Acclaim and Funcom could have really scored here with something that played fast and used the power of the Saturn to paint a digitized world that did the film justice. Yet here we are stuck with gameplay that is slow and clumsy, no in-game story beyond text, and lots of repeated enemies that die with the same simple moves. I genuinely have to question whether this was initially intended to be released for the Super Nintendo and Genesis, and switched midway through development for the Saturn and PlayStation. Nothing here screams 32-bit quality. Even the digitized graphics are plain and lacking any real pizzazz to spruce it up beyond what we had seen before. Seriously, there are 16-bit games that kick this to the curb in regards to graphical presentation. But more than likely, this was just Acclaim being Acclaim. Score the license and kick it out the door to secure a quick buck. That business philosophy is why they are no longer here, and we are only left with the dark specters of their past. If you have a special memory of it as a kid, you already know why you want it. For the rest of you, this is a fire and a miss on an epic scale. Avoid it at all cost. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.